Welcome to Afros and Audio's Black History Month interview series. My name is Talib Jasser, founder and CEO of Afros and Audio Podcast Festival, the first two-day conference for and by Black independent podcast creatives and audio professionals. I'm excited to spotlight 28 outstanding indie podcast creatives who answer the call to be a part of this series. Today, my guest is Q. Welcome and thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, man. Thanks for having me. I think this is just it's a blessing, man. 28 days. I'm blessed to be a part of this cast for these next 28 days.
Yeah,
So
man.
thanks for the opportunity.
No doubt, man. I'm glad to have you on here. Good for us to connect in this way. We've been rocking with each other since the first conference.
For sure.
And I don't know, this is the first time we actually really got a chance to sit down and talk about the podcast in depth.
It
So,
is, though. Yeah.
yeah,
Actually.
for real. But I'm going to let you talk about the podcast and get into that in your network. But the first
Okay.
thing was get a little bit of background about you. Tell folks about Q.
Well, just a little bit about me. I'm from the city of Detroit, East Side. You see my hat, part of my East Side. I actually just a little bit of background on how I got started in podcasting. It really wasn't even my idea. This was just crazy. I had a couple of partners who had mentioned to me about internet radio. That's how long ago we started doing this. And I did some research and I just started doing something in my mom's attic on Blog Talk Radio. I don't even know if some people listening probably don't not even old enough to know what that is, but it was a where you could actually do live audio and people could call in and stuff. I did that for maybe about 3 months by myself. And this is the one thing about podcasting. If you're not comfortable talking to yourself for 30 minutes, then this might not be this might not be the thing for you. But yeah, just that was just a little tidbit. But coming up though, like I said, just a kid from the east side of Detroit, man, just trying to figure his way through things. Found out I had a little gift of communication and it goes well with podcasting and writing. So that's what I do now.
That's what's up, man. Yeah, Blog Talk Radio. I remember fondly.
Throwback.
Word up. And I have never been the type that's been comfortable talking to myself for 30 minutes. So here we are. But that's dope, man. I appreciate that backstory. So talk to us about the podcast and how you've developed it and your work
Mhm.
over the years.
Yeah. So yeah, just going back to that, starting off on Blog Talk Radio, this was 2011. Like I said, I think the term podcast probably wasn't even being used. I think we were just calling it internet radio. But it started off with a 30-minute show. I started by myself, basically talking to myself for 30 minutes about random topics. Every now and then people would call in. So I would have maybe one or two callers or something like that. But for the most part, I'm talking to myself. So I did that for a few months or maybe about a month and a half. Then my buddy came on, Monk Money, who is my co-host now. And we started doing this thing. I think it was every Tuesday night. So it was once a week. Every Tuesday night, it was me and him just talking about random topics. People started calling in. And I know what happened was we missed a Tuesday and people started reaching out to me like, where you guys are, where are you? So I started noticing them people are listening. It's cool. So we just kept it going from there. And I have to say that it has elevated because of our determination and consistency. I think that's the part that people missed about podcasts is that I'm not going to say that anybody can do it, but if you are doing it, then consistency is the key to longevity. If you don't keep it going, if you don't stay in people's faces, if you don't have some kind of continuity, then you'll lose listeners. So that's the one thing that's very important, which is something we've been keeping up with for the past almost 12 years now, just being consistent. So that's how that happened. Now, after a while, I have to be honest, like doing podcasts are fun for me still, but I've gotten used to being on the other side of the camera now. Like I don't have to be the personality. I like to produce podcasts now, which is how we got to where we are now, just doing the podcast network. So at this moment, we started off with a 30-minute show. Since then, we've grown into 7 podcasts currently on the podcast network, 2 of which I do host. The other 5 are other people that I produce their podcast. So kind of came from the attic. I ain't gonna say we got it from the basement. We came from the attic. And now actually the funny thing is that the new studio is in the basement. I guess we went backwards. We went from up to down, but whatever. That's where the studio is. The studio had always been in my mom's attic. And then when we started doing it more consistently, we moved to my mom's basement. Shout out to the basement over on the block, which is why we still got the street sign in the basement. And real quick, story about that. Shout out to my moms. Rest in peace to my moms. But she helped me steal that street sign. So it's in the basement studio right now in memory of her.
Wow, man. It's a story, bro. I love that. So you've been around for a while now, over a decade, in how
Right.
I don't mean to say it like that, but understanding how podcasting started and how it's
Mhm.
grown. Did you see podcasting becoming what it is today? When you
Not at all. Not I didn't see that
how
at
so?
all. So I know we started off doing it as entertainment, it's like radio. So I felt like it was, I guess back in the day, they used to call it pirate radio. I was thinking of something like that. But then when I noticed that corporations, everybody's using podcasts and podcasts have been around forever, it seems, but now they're starting to be used commercially. I think people are starting to actually tap into like advertising and things like that. Corporations have podcasts that you wouldn't even know that like a certain company would even have a podcast. So I think seeing that, I seen the evolution of it. And this is something too, though, that I have to tell people who are doing podcasts, because sometimes people go to conferences or they see a lot of people, maybe even in their city, that do podcasts and they get discouraged. But what I have to let you know, at least from podcasters of color, even though it seems like there's a lot of us, we're still a very small percentage of the overall podcast community. And I think a lot of people don't even notice that. So they give up like such and such has a podcast. They got a podcast. I don't want to do it. But I have to tell people like every restaurant's selling hamburgers. Like nobody quit because McDonald's has hamburgers. Everybody still just recreates the hamburger. So recreate the podcast. So that's kind of where I'm at with it now. But no, I had no idea that it would be to like the degree that it is now. I had no idea. And it's still at its infancy. Like it hasn't even gotten to where it could be.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there was a few things you said there. One is that I think it's a very deliberate act to socialize scarcity, right? Especially
Mhm.
in communities like ours where we do feel like, okay, there's already one going on like that. So I guess there's no room for me.
Right.
That's deliberate and as of a mindset to have. And you talk about hamburgers, YouTube is saturated if we're going to go there.
Right.
But a million people are going to upload a video today, more than a million. So it's like,
Exactly.
so like cut it, and nobody's in that conversation on YouTube. They're just
Right.
uploading videos. So yeah, we definitely get to understand that the market isn't saturated. It's definitely not saturated by us. And so one of our missions is to make sure that we increase the active podcast by Black folks in the medium because it is evolving, it is growing, and we get to have a piece of that.
For
For
sure.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just to piggyback on that, I think this is a really big point, though. I don't know how many times we have to keep drilling it in, though. Don't be discouraged about how many people have podcasts. In real life, a million people have businesses too. And what do they say? 3% of those fail in the first 90 days or whatever. The thing is that most people, and I don't want to drag on people, but most people start creating podcasts and they don't have the wherewithal to stay consistent. So a lot of people that have podcasts in real life, you don't really have to be worried about them being competition because it's only going to last a couple of months. And that's not to downplay anybody. It's just the fact that a lot of people do it as a hobby and it's not their passion. So like I think when you're doing podcasting, even though it can be lucrative, I think that you do have to have a certain passion for it. Because if you don't, if it's all about trying to make a dollar, this isn't going to work for you. Unless you bring that passion with it, you'll be one of those podcasts that I'm not concerned about.
yeah, word up, word up. And then the other piece and part of the reasons why Afros and audio exists is because a lot of people, when they don't know what to do or how to keep something going, they will stop, they will quit. And so wanting to provide that source of resources and support so that we can make sure that more podcasts stay active in the market because they deserve to be heard. It's just a lot of people that fall off for
Yeah,
various
for sure.
reasons. One is the passion.
Mhm.
Two is whether they have the support and resources around them to keep them going and
Right.
encourage. And so, yeah, man, that's dope. Coming from a veteran such as yourself, it makes sense. You have the knowledge, you have the experience, you talk to enough people. I'm sure there are people who have wanted you to help them produce podcasts, their
For
own
sure.
podcasts, and you've had to ask them questions. Are you passionate about this? Are you trying to do it?
Right. Don't waste my time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So going back to your podcast network and the two that you still host, are the two one of the two that you still host the same as the original one? that you started?
Actually, no, it's completely different. So the first one, which is the flagship show, the Wake and Bake show, that is the initial show that we had. Now I've got two co-hosts now, so it's me, Monk Money, and then now we have Angry Man, both of which we grew up in the same neighborhood, which is where E Block Radio came from. It's just E is the beginning of the name of our street on the east side. That started off as, like I said, it was a 30-minute show once a week for a moment, but we started getting so much traction that we ended up doing it 3 days a week now in the morning. So now we have more of a morning show. Like, I don't even really call ours a podcast anymore. I call it a morning show. So the second one that I host, though, is a bourbon review podcast, which is called Beards, Bourbon, and Whiskey podcast. So shout out to Angry Principal. I got a lot of angry people in my crew. I say I got an Angry Principal and my man Bo. We co-host that. What's cool about that, though, is that it takes us into an industry that is less tapped in by people of color as well, which is the whiskey and bourbon sector of spirits. Now, I'm gonna tell you what's really cool about doing the bourbon podcast is that we've actually now made a connection with the Black Spirits event, which is a national event that kind of, what's the word I want to look for? Curates a lot of Black Spirits owners, and they do events around the country right now, but they're planning on around the world. Which actually, I think it's safe to say this, and I'm going to say it anyway, but I think the ink is dry on this one. They are actually doing a Black Spirits event in New York for Juneteenth this year. So we'll be in New York for that. But the cool thing about the Bourbon podcast is it allowed me to build that relationship with them. And now this is going to be something even bigger. So not only are we entertaining and getting free liquor, but we're also making that connection to out of the podcast studio into the community. Now, with that being said, though, we're also doing some education because a lot of people don't even know that these Black Spirits owners exist. And there are quite a few Black Spirits owners, and even some who have their own distillery. So this is amazing information that people wouldn't even get if you weren't tied to these communities. So we're happy to be a part of that. And so shout out to Lazar and Deshaun, who are the two curators of the event, which started right here in the city of Detroit.
That's awesome, man.
They'd
Listen,
be happy to hear that plug.
yeah, I'm gonna meet you there, man, because I'm a bourbon lover myself. So
Oh,
that's
for sure.
yeah, that's awesome, man. And you bring up such a great point or point in your journey, which is the fact that it starts in the basement or the attic on the mic, right? And then it can extend itself and expand itself into these brand partnerships, depending on what you're talking about, different organizations and all of that. And I always encourage people to use their content as resources and or an extension of what another organization is doing or business, because it is that there is a lane for that. But you've been doing this for a while, and so you get that, you understand that, but a lot of people don't. So I'm glad that you made that point.
Yeah, they don't. And real quick, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I definitely get that point. And again, I want to piggyback to what you said about me being a veteran and doing this for so long. I did want to say this, though. I actually made a Throwback Thursday post, and I found a YouTube clip from 2011. And I'm like, that's 11 years ago. So I remember the feeling of looking at that clip. It was a twofold kind of feeling. So the first thing was like, yeah, we was the first ones. I felt like, I'm not sure if we were actually, but I feel like we was like the first ones doing live audio and video podcasting in the city of Detroit at that time. And then I was like, the second side of that though is, damn, we've been doing this for a long time and it don't feel like I'm where I need to be. So it's a twofold thing, right? So you get encouraged because, yeah, we've been doing it for a long time. Maybe we open some doors for some people, but then the other side of it is, damn, we've been doing this for a long time. Like, where's the fruits of my labor? But then that's when I really started thinking, and I hear people say it all the time, and I took it for granted, but a lot of people say it took me 10 years to become an overnight success. That statement is like the truest thing ever. So I honestly understand it now, and I feel that. But also, too, just to get back to that same conversation, I put a lot of work into it. Most of it, if not all of it, was trial and error. So when newcomers come up and they're podcasting, I'm always happy to give them information that will spare them from wasting 10 years. I won't say wasting, but to spare them from losing direction or not having the proper resources. Because if I went through all of this stuff before, let me give you the resources so you can avoid all of that. And I think that's where the Afros and Audio Podcast Conference just like, it really ties all of that together because you're able to bring novice podcasters and veteran podcasters together and try to come up with something in the middle. So what's good for the novice is that you've got people who've been doing it for a long time who can give you information on how to maneuver through this thing. But then on the other standpoint too, you have novice or new podcasters who can give us old heads some new ideas and some innovative thoughts on how to refocus or rebrand our own thing. So I think it all works out together. So I think that those two and the Afros Audio Podcast Conference and the community as a whole is something that's I'm just happy to be a part of. And I think a few people heard the story already, but it just came out of me seeing it on Instagram and shot a video to win a ticket to the first one. And that's how this whole thing started.
Word up, man. I appreciate that. And no, you're right about the time it takes to become successful, but it also comes inside of that experience and that journey. And now you are being much more intentional. Now you know what's out there. Before you didn't. And so that's the awesomeness of the journey, but it also is people can start now, be in the game for a year or two. And based off of your own experience, they can now say, okay, there's brands out here, there's organizations that I can connect with. It doesn't have to take 10 years, but it does take an intentional focus. Like that brand deal didn't happen out of the blue. You made that happen. You created that opportunity for yourself and then saw it through until it happened. And that's what it takes, right? It still takes you making the moves. Shit don't fall out the sky.
That's true. And then sometimes, in all honesty, sometimes it's, I don't want to call it luck, but it's just being in the right place at the right time. Just to piggyback on the situation with the Black Spirits event, what actually happened was I produced my nephew's podcast, which is the Shad versus Everybody podcast. It's an interview-based podcast. So he interviews a lot of rap artists in the city. So what happened was that we were on like maybe episode 50, I believe, of his, and an artist manager was like watching us, like he was watching the interviews and stuff. So he's saying that it was a platform that he wanted to get his artists on, and that ended up being Deshaun, right, one of the curators. So he brought his artist there. We were doing the interview, and he noticed all the bourbon and whiskey bottles, but behind the set. So we started talking about that, and he started telling me how he had a partner and they were working on this Black Spirits thing. And he was like, maybe we could come on your bourbon show and we could talk about it. And that's how I got introduced to Lazar. And that's how that relationship started. So sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time. And and it's the thing too, that I have to tell people, being in the right place at the right time happens more often than not, but you have to be prepared for that right time though. Because sometimes people are in the right place at the right time and don't say the right things and it still don't work. So you got to be prepared once that opportunity presents itself. So
right. And to end it all, you were still available. You were still around. You didn't start 10 years ago and stopped 5 years in. You still had a show that was capable of bringing people on and creating new content and all that sort of thing. So again, it becomes a part of the long game. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how this is going to expand and extend itself, but you will never know if you quit before you get there and to that point.
That's it.
So you continue.
Not yet.
In a lot of ways, man. So talk to me about one of the things I know that is as a pain point for some podcasters. One is if they start a podcast, they started one way, they might stick with that way. Done it with, I started one way and then I got co-hosts on. I started one way and then I started producing more and getting left in front of the mic. Talk about being open to evolving in the space.
That's the main thing you have to do. I want to mention this for 1, 2, 3, maybe almost 5 years. I worked at Comcast, which was Xfinity now, but it used to be Comcast. And I remember working there, and the first thing they told me on the first day that I was there is that the C in Comcast stands for change, right? So that just means that all the time, things are evolving, things are changing. And I was just thinking, like, if $1 million or almost $1 billion company has to evolve and reassess and change itself, why would I think that my small organization wouldn't have to do the same thing? So if you go in with that idea that you have to change with the times, you have to change with the trends, you have to keep up with the trends of business, because at the end of the day, doing a podcast can be something that you can express your feelings and get information out. But at the end of the day, this is a business. This is something that you want to be profitable. And with that being in mind, you have to change as the market changes. And I'm cool with that. I'm comfortable with that. Essentially, we weren't doing the morning show. The only thing that did remain consistent with our original podcast is that we don't really do interviews. So if people want to come on our morning show, then they're welcome to be a guest host. So you can come on, you can guest host with us. You can talk about the morning topics, and then you can talk about yourself. But I'm not interviewing because I've done some interviews, like I pick and choose those. So I feel like Gail or Oprah, you know what I'm saying? At that point, I get to pick and choose who I want to interview. But I do that because to be honest, it's tough to build your schedule around other people trying to interview people, because people's schedules don't work out. They flake out on you in the last minute. Some people just don't interview well, and I don't want my content to be based on somebody else. That's the only thing that remained consistent with the flagship show, is that we don't really do interviews. But outside of that, I'm willing to change to whatever is necessary. Just like originally we were doing all audio, and then I realized we need to add some video. Also, too, I think one of the innovative things that we were doing from day one is just doing live podcasts. Like we've never recorded a wake and bake show and then put it out. Like, they've always been live and interactive. The other shows that I produce, we record those, do the editing, and then put it out. And I'm cool with that. But for our show, we've always consistently remained a live show because we like the live interaction. But yeah, you got to be willing to change. And the people that are on your team need to be willing to do so as well, or it's not gonna work. It's really not gonna work.
Word up. So now you mentioned your nephew, right? That's a podcast.
Yep, Shad versus everybody.
Yeah, and then these other podcasts that you have that you're
Mhm.
producing. What do you see as the possibilities or potential for them coming into the game at this stage? You didn't necessarily see for yourself when you first came in 11 years ago.
The most obvious thing is a mentor. I'm a mentor by accident. I didn't even plan on doing that, but I'm a mentor by accident. So I think that's the main thing that they have, is that advantage. Somebody who knows the industry, somebody who's built relationships, somebody, I guess we'll say, known in the industry kind of thing. And I say that because some interviews that my nephew has gotten has been, because people know me, and like they know that I produced the show, and they feel a certain level of comfort, and I have a certain level of respect that people give me that allows a lot of things to fire with these other podcasts. I do want to give a shout out to Huey. That's Mr. Oh Yeah Detroit. I actually produce his podcast, the Oh Yeah podcast. He does a lot of the connecting with his interviewers, though. He actually makes it easy for me to produce because he knows a lot of people as well. Most notably, our biggest interview to date since we've been doing his, I think we're on we're only on like episode 15, I believe, at this point. But he had a chance to interview Manny Fresh, and the Manny Fresh interview did like 20,000 views or something like that. And like from that point on, we built a good relationship to where he knows the right people, I know the right people, and we're both respected in the city. So it allows us to be a pretty good team when it comes to setting up interviews and getting production done. So I think not only have the new podcast that I produce gained there's some benefits to knowing me, and there's some benefits for me knowing them. I guess I'll just say it like that. It's been a two-way street. So even though I've got some years in the game and I can be somewhat of a mentor, I've learned a lot from the people that I'm producing their podcast as well, and been able to use that in my own podcast too. So it's a good situation. It goes back and forth.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. So, what would you say would be like your biggest win if we just think about the last year, or if you want to take it back? What's been your biggest win since you've been in the game? Would you
Mhm.
say? I'm sure you got, but
Yeah, I got a few actually, I think. But like I said, I think the biggest win, I think I mentioned this off camera, but I think the biggest win was making this connection with the Afros and Audio podcast community. Like I said, I don't even want to call it a conference. I just want to call it community, because I think making this connection has been the biggest win for me, because this is something that, two things. This is something that I wasn't looking for, and this is something that I didn't know I needed. So both of those things. So I think that makes it the biggest win, because I think those surprise wins are the best ones, because you didn't even know you was looking for it, but then you got it. You're like, oh shit, I've been needed this. So I think that's like the biggest win, one of the biggest wins. I think the next thing is I guess this is a more literal sense, but I think the biggest win literally was our first award that we won, and we won it as an entire podcast. I like those better as opposed to a single victory, like maybe me getting a producer award or something. But when the whole show gets an award, I think that's a cool thing. Our first award was back in 2019. We actually won. I can't remember the name of the award show, but it was based out of Charlotte. And that was crazy because I don't know nobody in Charlotte. I don't even know how we got nominated, but we ended up going out to Charlotte just on a whim. We got nominated for 2 awards. We won 1. And I didn't even think we were going to win 1, but we went all the way out there to go to the award show, and thank God we didn't go for nothing. But that was a pretty big win right there. It deterred me from quitting. Because at that point, even in 2019, you're looking at almost 10 years and it's like, what are we doing this for? But then we got that small recognition. I won't call it small recognition. We'll call it a big win. We got that, and it rejuvenated what I wanted to do with this podcast thing. I felt like maybe we actually have something. So that's definitely a good win there too. So
That's dope, man. So what would you say, and I know you got a lot on your plate already, but as you think about expansion in this year and beyond, what does that look like for you and the team?
oh yeah, for sure. What I'm looking at now, and I guess we've talked about it, so I guess I'll go ahead and put it out here. I think what we're looking at now, as far as expansion, is of course I want to do more production. Eventually, I want to phase myself out of the on camera, on air personality, and do more production. But what we're really working on is, and I use this as an example, but the cash money situation, right? Where I want to have the E-Block Radio podcast network, but then underneath, I think my nephew Shad is ready to have his own situation. So like how Lil Wayne has a Young Money, but it's still Cash Money, the same situation. So I think he's ready to have his own set of shows. So at this point, we'll be kind of not passing the torch, but giving him an option of his own. And I think that's, as far as expansion goes, that's the direction we're headed now. So we're trying to create a situation where he can have his own basically section of the podcast network. I think that's going to be good because, excuse me, he's younger and he has some different viewpoints, and he can probably have a different genres of podcasters that maybe I wouldn't come in contact with. And it also gives him some producer credit, which is cool. And I think that for me, that would be like the ultimate thing, because it's almost, I guess, what you would call a legacy. So it's like, there's no point in creating all this stuff if it can't be beneficial for somebody else. Like, I don't want to take all the credit, like I'm doing this and doing that, and then I just die with it. So it'll be cool to pass that legacy on. So that's the expansion that we're looking at this point.
That's cool, man. I dig that. That's going to be really dope. Last question for you. Asked you, based on your experience and your expertise so far, what advice would you give to aspiring podcasters, even podcasters who have been in the game for a minute and they're getting fatigued, ready to call it quits? If you want to expand on that a bit.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, especially, and I guess I'll say, especially for those who have been doing it for a while, is that the energy that you give, it needs to be consistent, whether you've got 1 viewer or a listener or 1 million viewers or listeners. I think that you just have to have that same energy. Like, so again, sometimes you feel like, all right, I've been doing this for 10 years and I've only got 2 listeners, but you better give those same 2 listeners that same energy, like for the whole 10 years. And the only reason this is a thing is because when you're talking about podcasting, this is recorded data. So just because somebody didn't listen or watch it right now, it's going to remain there. So when people come back to listen or to watch, and they see that you're not giving that 100% energy, you're never going to get any new listeners, because they like, oh, you don't even seem like you want to do this. This is boring. Like, I've heard podcasts where I'm just like, you can tell, like, you just doing this. Do you even care? You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't encourage me to listen. So you got to get that consistent energy every time. So even if you got 1 listener or 1 million listeners, those 1 million listeners will come, because there are statistics showing that podcast listenership is going up daily. And not only is the listenership going up, but advertising is going up too. So be aware that not only are regular listeners listening, but advertisers are listening too. So every time you get on this mic, you are auditioning. I think people need to really keep that in mind. Every time you turn on that camera, every time you come on this mic, you are auditioning. So you need to give it 100% every time. So this is your monologue. Every time you log on, this is your monologue.
That's what's up, man. I think that's great advice. You absolutely right, man. And shout out to the latest Black Listening Report, where we've gone up from 13% in 2020, 2021 to 43%. And that's important. And it's something for people to understand too, again, especially in our communities. And we can't look at the podcasting game or any other industry from a lens that isn't ours. Our come up is always going to be different.
Always, always.
The road to success and opportunity is always going to look a little bit different. So with that said, the opportunity to come into this industry and really be able to leave your living record, as you said, man, talk from your own perspective and your own experiences, that's going to be important. And it's all relative. The more listeners we get, the more data is we receive, the more advertisers get interested. And so it's important that we understand that. And we understand
Sure.
there's a business side to this. Not everybody's concerned about the business side, but if you are, then it's important to understand that not everybody's going to be auditioning. Some people do a podcast and don't want nobody to hear it.
Exactly. They're
That's
just
the
expressing
thing.
themselves, and that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, that would probably be me. But yeah, but it's important that people know that everybody that listens deserves that energy and that intimacy, because podcasting is intimate, man. And anybody who listens to your show has chosen you
Exactly.
specifically. And it's still not the default, a source of entertainment and news, podcasting. People are
Right.
still go to YouTube and television and all this sort of thing,
Mhm.
radio. So we are the ones, we've got to be the ambassadors for podcasting. We've got
For
to be
sure.
to say, I have a podcast, listen to it. So
Yeah.
that's our responsibility, because this game is still pretty new.
Yeah. And really own it too, though. That's something that I had to really step into, because I think it wasn't until maybe I think it was maybe last year I was at the doctor's office and I forgot what we were talking about. But then whatever we was talking about, the nurse asked me what I did for a living. And that was the first time that I was just like, I'm a podcast producer. And she was like, whoa, really? Yeah. Like you really have to, if this is what you do, don't refer to your podcast as a little podcast. Don't ever refer to any of your businesses as little. You can call it a small business, but don't say it's my little business, because that just deflates it. But you really got to own that you are a podcaster. And there's nothing embarrassing about that. There's nothing meek about that, because even though a lot of people think they can do it, they can't. So if you're a podcast producer or a podcast host, say it, like own that. I think people really got to start. This is your art. Own your art. Don't be afraid to tell people, yes, I produce podcasts. This is where you can listen. People are scared to tell you to listen to their podcast because they think they suck. I don't care if you think I suck. If you go and listen, I got you.
Word up, man. You said it best. I know you have another project that's outside of podcasting. I definitely want you to touch on it so people can support. So if you want to go ahead and
Oh
mention
yeah.
it, please.
I got so deep in this conversation, I forgot all about it. But yeah, so this is actually it's outside of the podcast realm, but inclusive as well. What it is, I'm working on a documentary about sleep apnea. So I actually have sleep apnea. But I think the thing is that the African American community is like leading the way in mortality rates concerning sleep apnea. And most of it is because we are going undiagnosed or don't have the proper health care to get diagnosed. With that being the thing, I feel like it was important for me being in media to create a documentary that is going to spread awareness. So I've created, or in the middle of creating, a documentary. It's currently titled Dying to Sleep, which is going to be a series of interviews and testimonials, basically, from people who suffer from sleep apnea, a couple of doctors that I've been able to get in contact with as well to be doing those interviews. And then, of course, telling my story about how I found out I had it and what I'm doing to trying to correct that. So that's a project I'm working on now. There is a crowdfunding effort at this moment to get the full project funded. You can actually get more details about the documentary on the IG page, which is actually Dying to Sleep LC. You can follow us on Instagram there, and all the links there will show you the videos that we've created so far, and also give you the link to where you can donate for the project. So again, it's going to be a documentary, but also we're going to do some podcast interviews as well. With that in mind, I did want to give a salute to two medical companies who are actually partnering with us. The first being Lofta, the second one being Vital Sleep. Both of these are sleep medical device and consultation organizations, which when I reached out originally, I was able to speak with the marketing departments of both of those, and they were really excited about the opportunity to partner with us to get this word out, because just like I know, they know that this is a place where awareness needs to be spread. And it's crazy because this is just like the podcast thing. Since I got diagnosed with sleep apnea, maybe about right before the podcast, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, I've had 3 friends since then who have sleep apnea too. But just like the podcast thing, I was able to go through some things, recognize what they were going through, and try to help them out before they had to experience all the medical difficulties I did originally. The podcast and this sleep apnea documentary kind of go hand in hand with my life experiences, which is odd. I never really even thought about it till right now. But I think both of those allowed me to help people in their podcast career and help people with their sleep apnea journey. It was relative. I never really thought about that until just now. That was organic.
Yeah, that's what's up. I have that way about myself, man. So
I think that's what it is, right? It's like
yeah,
therapy or something.
yeah. But no, I appreciate that, man. It is a deadly condition that a lot of Black people and a lot of people in general deal with. And we definitely want the word to be out, man. And I'm glad that you're leading the charge on that. And,
Appreciate it.
you know, prioritizing your own health when it comes to that. Long live the chief, man. You got a lot of work to do.
I got a lot of work to do, man. And I know we getting ready to get out of here, and I'm not sure what date the interview is going to be released, but today, while we're recording, this is my granny's birthday. I just want to give her a shout out to my granny. Yeah, she passed away last year, but today is her birthday, so I celebrate her every year anyway. Happy birthday, Granny. Love you to death, to life, to something. Love you forever. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Happy birthday, Grandma. I actually, before I got her on here to record, I just posted a video. I found a video of a birthday party with us, entire family, on her 91st birthday. And it was just her saying some words about her birthday and everything. It was just like, I almost got into tears before I got into the video. I was like, let me hurry up and watch this video and get on here so I can do this interview. But yeah, shout out to my granny. Shout out to my whole family.
Word up. February 18th.
February 18th. Yeah.
Yeah, happy birthday, Granny.
For sure.
Yeah, my grandmother is 92 years young right now. So I know how special grandmoms are to us, man. So
for sure, especially when they're around that long.
Yeah,
that's a wealth of information right there. For sure.
Absolutely, man. Bro, I appreciate this conversation, man. I always appreciate chopping it up with you.
Oh, yeah.
But this, like I said, I think this is the first time that we actually got to talk in depth about the work that you have been putting in. I did not know that you are an old head in this.
For sure, a super old head.
Yeah. So now that I know, I'll be leaning on you a lot more than I was. But man, I appreciate it. I'm so grateful that you submitted that video. You showed up all the way from Detroit to Brooklyn, New York in 2019.
For sure.
Yeah. In history, man. We've been rocking ever since.
No doubt. No doubt. I definitely appreciate the opportunity too, because again, without that video, without our conversation at the front door when I wasn't on the list, like I said, everything just works in divine order. I really believe that.
For sure, man. All right, man. I'm gonna close this out. And again, I appreciate your time. If you would, before I do my spiel, you've already mentioned where they can find out about the sleep apnea project, and that'll all be in the description. But let people know where they can find you. If there's a website, social media.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You can check me out on q.lewis313. You can check out our show, The Wake and Bake Show, and all the other shows on the podcast network at www.eblockradio.com.
All that'll be in the description below, and I'm gonna close this out. All right.
Cool.
I want to give a big thanks to our Afros in Audio and Black podcast community for supporting our commitment for community and collaboration. If you'd like to join the Black Podcasters Association, the link will be in the description below. And if you want to join us at the 5th annual Afros in Audio Podcast Festival, visit bit.ly/AFAU FAQ, which will also be in the description. Follow us on all social media channels at Afros in Audio. Thanks again, Q, for being a part of Afros in Audio's first ever Black History Month interview series. I appreciate you, man.
For sure. I appreciate you, man. It's an honor. That's all I got to say. And we'll see you in Baltimore.
Word up. I'll be there.
For sure.